Well, 2021 is winding down, and we want to take a minute to talk about some of the big court cases this year in agriculture. It's the topic of today's Rural Money segment. Roger McEowen joins us now with the highlights. Roger, thanks for joining us. Now, one of the cases that made your list involves eminent domain and the rerouting of irrigation. Give us an overview of that one.
Well, these are just some recent cases. The point on this one is that the government has the right to take your private property for public use, but under the Constitution, of course, they have to pay just compensation for what they take. Well, in this case, there was a ministry that owned a 40-acre parcel, which included a church camp, and it was within the bounds of a national refuge that the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service had a protection plan for. And their protection plan included filling in irrigation ditches to return spring water back to their historic paths. And as a result of that, the ministry's church camp was washed away in a series of floods caused by heavy rainfall. And so they sued for about $200,000 for taking of their buildings and so forth. And the court said, no, the weight of the evidence was that the flooding of the church camp would have occurred anyway, regardless of whether the restoration channel was built. So no compensation was required.
And in another case, farmers relied to their detriment on a crop supply salesman to check crops. A fascinating case here. Tell us more about that.
Yeah, this is a tough one. Farmers had a long-standing arrangement with a salesman of the crop supply company that was a friend of theirs and had been checking their crops for them and controlling stink bugs for the last 20 to 30 years. Well, to make a long story short, the farmers got into financial trouble with the crop supply business, and their friend was told not to inspect their crops anymore, but nobody told the farmers, and the crops were ruined. And the court said that based on the facts, again, the defendants, the crop supply company and their friend, had a duty to keep monitoring and treating the crops or tell them that the service was no longer available. And that's detrimental reliance. And damages were owed about $135,000 to the farmers.
Wow, interesting. Now, you're also highlighting a case involving a drugstore in rural Montana. We can all relate to the crux of this case, a bad valuation. Give us some background.
Yeah, this is in northeast Montana, Plentywood, Montana, which has quite a history to it, including the name behind the town. But the drugstore in town was trying to put a value on the space that they rented because they wanted to claim a business deduction for the payment that they made. And of course, you can only get a business deduction for the fair value of that rent. Well, the problem is in a lot of rural places across the country, we don't have a lot of data as to what that type of space would rent for. And in Montana, the real estate data like this is not even made publicly available. So that's the key one in this one. At least the tax court didn't impose any penalties on them, but it does show you some issues that we have in rural areas concerning property valuation.
Now, before we let you go, we want to talk a minute about a group of California restaurants and grocers. It's filed suit to stop Prop 12 from going into effect next month. Major ag groups have been unsuccessful here. Your thoughts on that?
Well, you can certainly understand why the restaurants are suing. I mean, anytime you've got a piece of legislation like this that limits your choice and increases your costs, you're not going to like it. And this is the bill that determines how animals are to be raised to be able to sell their products in the California market. So we'll see what happens. A number of other states have challenged it. We'll see if some in-state restaurants have more success than out-of-state interests have had and in the past. And that might be the difference if there is a different outcome in this case.
Right. I guess we'll know in a few weeks. That's Roger McEowen with the Washburn School of Law. Appreciate your time today.